liberty, the pursuit of happiness, these inalienable rights that today we take for granted. Imagine living without these. Imagine a day without freedom. Anybody who suffered the consequences of October 7th, 1763 knew that it was not imagination. On that fateful day, the British Parliament passed the Proclamation of 1763, an act that forbade American colonists from settling past the Appalachian Mountains. Restrictions from Great Britain were unheard of. America had always been its golden child. American colonists were furious. The Townshend Acts followed in 1766, taxing glass, paint, lead, tea, and other imported items, leading to colonist unrest. Then, in 1770, British soldiers killed at least 5 colonists in Boston in an act of infamy that went down in history as the Boston Massacre. The Townshend Acts were repealed in 1770. Consequently, the Tea Act arrived on April 7, 1773, giving the British East India Company a complete monopoly on the sale of tea in the colonies. This threatened to bankrupt countless colonial tea salesmen, both smugglers and legitimate business owners alike. To retaliate, a band of Bostonian Sons of Liberty, a violent pro-independence group, threw the Boston Tea Party. They dressed as Mohawk Native Americans and dumped 342 chests of British tea in Boston Harbor. In response, Britain passed the Coercive Acts, later coined by the colonists as the Intolerable Acts, which punished Massachusetts by replacing its elected representatives with royally appointed officials, stopping citizens from assembling, trying British officials in neutral territory, and closing Boston Harbor until the tea dumped at the Boston Tea Party was paid for.
This set the stage for the First Continental Congress. Delegates from all 13 colonies met and decided to boycott British goods, as well as to appoint George Washington Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. The Revolutionary War began on April 19, 1775, when American soldiers fought the British at the battles of Lexington and Concord. In a last-second attempt at peace, because most of the delegates did not really want to break from Britain, the Olive Branch Petition, passed on July 5, 1775, asked for fighting to cease and Parliament to retract the tyrannical acts. A copy was sent to England on July 8th. Britain declined, and Congress made no further attempt for peace. Common Sense, a pamphlet by Thomas Paine that attempted to persuade colonists to support the Patriot cause, was published in January of 1776.
Normally, historians think that common sense is what converted the Americans to independence. In fact, there was substantial resistance to independence, and many states had kept in place and even renewed instructions to their delegates to the Continental Congress. They were to approve nothing that didn't lead to reconciliation with Britain.
They say there's a first for everything, and Richard Henry Lee was the first to propose independence. On June 2nd, 1776, Lee presented this resolution to the Second Continental Congress.
Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved.
The Second Continental Congress agreed to postpone voting on the resolutions for 1 month, until July 2nd. In the meantime, Congress created a committee to draft a document proclaiming that the United States was a separate country. This was known as the Committee of Five. The committee included Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Roger Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston. Jefferson, Franklin, and Adams are known to have made suggestions and modifications to the document. Those three, as well as Sherman, ended up signing the final declaration. Livingston was unable to sign, despite being on the Committee of Five, because he had to return to New York to attend to personal matters. The committee nominated Jefferson to draft the document, and the Virginia statesman reluctantly accepted. He worked for 2 weeks, from June 14th to June 28th, on what would become the Declaration of Independence.
Well, he said his purpose was not to say something novel, but to give a reflection of the American mind with a form appropriate for the occasion.
On July 2nd, 12 colonies voted for the resolutions, as New York abstained from voting. From July 2nd until July 4th, the Second Continental Congress occupied itself editing Jefferson's draft. Jefferson took offense to these changes to his brainchild, but did not speak up. In one draft, a section personally blamed King George III for the slave trade. This came under fire by other members of the committee and Congress, who believed the passage was too strong. In response, it was stricken from the final product. On July 4th, John Hancock, President of Congress, and Charles Thomson, Secretary of Congress, signed the Declaration. A copy was sent to each of the colonies and the Army, and the document was read publicly. The rest of the delegates did not sign until August, when an official copy with all the signatures was printed. The Declaration of Independence relied heavily on other documents that came before it. The first influence was the Magna Carta, a document by the British that is best known for being the first to guarantee certain human rights. Unfortunately, like the much later United States Declaration of Independence, these protections only applied to free men, but it was a start. In 1581, the Dutch Declaration of Independence entered the scene. It stresses an idea Jefferson borrowed: rulers get their power from the people. Writings during the 17th century Enlightenment premiered certain ideas, like John Locke's theory that every person is entitled to life, liberty, and estate. Jefferson slightly modified this line and transferred international fame to it. The Declaration, debated by the Continental Congress, also impacted government after it. In 1789, the Revolution still retained the diplomatic power to inspire the French.
Later, the French in particular believed everything about our revolution and our Constitution and adopted for theirs.
But the American Revolution did not just affect that time period.
On September the 2nd, 1945, when Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnam's independence, he quoted Thomas Jefferson. He quoted the American Declaration of Independence.
The Declaration was not meant for Britain. In fact, nobody is certain whether King George even read the document. It was meant for the colonists. It boosted morale and military recruitment soared. The Declaration of Independence legitimized the revolution. It imprinted, almost as if in stone, that there was a fighting force for the cause of independence. Declaring independence was in no way unanimous, however. Most colonists were ambivalent, but there was heated debate among the more involved parties, patriots and loyalists alike. Despite this, Congress made an executive decision to declare independence, essentially excluding loyalist sentiments. There was also quite a bit of debate as to whether or not it was right to include the claim that all men are born with certain inalienable rights. The Declaration of Independence promised that all men had the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, when in actuality, it only promised these natural rights to white landowning males. The northern states were against slavery, but the South knew that it was fundamental to its economy and would not allow it to be abolished. The Declaration of Independence successfully established a country and riled up colonists, but it did fall short of its mark in some distinct ways. The document never intended to set up a government, but rather to establish an independent nation. The Declaration also had no effect on women, Native Americans, and slaves. As such, slavery was not fully abolished in the United States until 1863, when Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation. Similarly, women did not have complete rights until 1920 with the 19th Amendment, giving them the right to vote. After the Declaration of Independence, the combat intensified. Right from the start, the Americans showed a drive to win.
What it did was it gave the Americans something to fight for, provide the American people with kind of a Bible, with kind of saying, this is our reason for fighting.
The burden of war was drastically lifted by French diplomacy. The country agreed to lend millions of dollars in cash and troops to the Americans in 1777. Diplomats such as Franklin helped form the alliance. In 1780, the British surrendered at the Battle of Yorktown. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 officially ended the conflict.
These revolutionaries laid the foundations for what would become the greatest nation ever. It all started, though, with that one earth-shaking document, the Declaration of Independence. Even roughly 230 years after the Second Continental Congress put pen to paper, July 4th, the date of the first signatures on the Declaration of Independence, is still celebrated nationwide as Independence Day. In the words of Benjamin Rush, "'Tis done. We have become a nation."